Hi everyone, welcome back to Casual Watch Reviews. I've got an interesting video today because I'm reacting to a comment that I received last week, but one that I get pretty regular. Seen it in the title of the video, but I've invited one of my friends in the YouTube community, a gentleman of the YouTube review community, and that is Bobby Legs. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hey Sam, thank you for having me on.
I'll show this comment that I get where you are reviewing a watch that somebody has sent you in for review. A comment usually involving you saying, oh, you're biased because you got this watch for free, or you're biased because you want to ingratiate yourself with this brand, so how can I trust what you're reviewing? Or how can I make a judgment based on what you're telling me when there is some benefit that you are gaining? Made me think that maybe it's time for YouTubers to actually talk about this. I'm going to be very much on the side of a reviewer who does take watches in for review. And Bobby, not that you're necessarily opposed to it, but this isn't a regular practice that you do. You tend to lean on your own collection.
That is correct. And I want to preface by saying that you've been doing it for 6 years, 6 or 7 years. I've been doing it for probably close to that. If you are a content creator and you are constantly uploading content, right, that takes a lot of work. It's not just this here on the camera. It's the editing. It's procuring pieces to review. It's thinking of topics and laying out an outline to discuss on a video. This takes a lot of time, right? I do not begrudge anyone to take fee per se, right, whether it be in the form of a watch or a form of a payment, to compensate for their time, because this does take a lot of time. There's a lot of passion involved that we get involved because of the passion, and then hey, this takes away time from other things that we can do. Now, the position that I take is that I've had experience with this, right? Once worked with a brand, and I use that term loosely. I met with them, right? And it's a very, very small micro brand, right? And I met with the owners, and we had a great conversation. The watch, not particularly anything that I would necessarily pick up, but they wanted to get their watch out there to the masses, right? And so they were meeting with content creators, and we had a good discussion. I told them that I would showcase their piece, for a couple conditions, right? I take a form of a payment in being the watch that I would give away to a subscriber. They were fine with that, and also that I was free to say whatever I wanted to say. The problem was, Sam, is that when I did the review, I felt like I did pull some punches. I wasn't being as critical as I should be. Now, I brought up some points where they could use, where there could have been improvement, right? But I felt like there was part of me that wasn't being true to myself. I don't know. It just didn't sit right with me. That's where I'm coming from in this discussion, Sam.
You very kindly agreed to be, maybe not the people's champion, but offering a counter argument to some of the points that I brought up. An argument that somebody watching this who feels very strongly that reviewers like me, for example, shouldn't be taking watches in for review. My first point is, I've titled this Perception of Gain. So say that I did a review, and I recently did one on a Ubic watch that's a Kickstarter. The perception, I think, of people watching a review is that if we, as a YouTuber, are accepting a watch for free, for example, I've never taken money for a watch review. This Ubic that I recently reviewed was $500, I think it's going to retail for. They haven't sent me one. I will only get this watch if the Kickstarter is successful. I got, I think, 6,000 views on this video. I can't disclose how much Google ad revenue I actually earn on this because it's part of the agreement that you have with Google, but let's just say so far that is the price of what you would get a Starbucks coffee for. Assuming I receive this watch for $500, and I then, in order to realize a gain from that watch, I then have to eBay sell it. So say I could eBay sell it for 200-ish, 220 out of it. That video, I estimate it took me about 12 hours to create and edit. Also, I have to pay tax on the YouTube earnings, tax on the eBay earnings as well. So I worked out that it actually would have been more profitable for me to drive for Uber in my home state of Florida for that 12 hours. It would be more profitable than me to somehow realize a gain from that watch. So I think the perception of people watching reviews where the review gets watched, it is somehow there's this money, there's this bucket of money that we are being coaxed with. If somebody comes along and says, "Oh, I'll give you all of this money to promote our watch," that is far, I know a number of YouTubers, and that is far from the reality. And what I do is I review it if I really like the watch and I think that I might keep it. So I don't know what your opinion on that one is.
No, and this goes to what I was saying before. I think many people do not realize the time and the effort that we put into it, and maybe don't realize that as YouTube content creators who are looking as this as a potential form of income, we don't make that much money when it comes to the Google AdSense. We know this. Me and you, we know behind the scenes, we know that it is a struggle that most YouTubers in many other genres where they make their money is not through the AdSense, right? It's not through the ads. It's through, merchandise. It's through programs that they might put on the, for sale, for their subscribers to subscribe to. Again, don't have a problem with that scenario as long as you disclose that you're being compensated.
My second point here, get your opinion on it, is I've titled this one, "Perception that you're above being sold to." I think that a lot of these comments come from a place of, I don't like watching reviews where you've received one in for free because I feel like you're selling this watch to me and I'm above being sold to. My counter to this is, first of all, in all of my reviews, I could do a better job of this. I'm not saying I am virtuous in this at all, but I always say, let me know what your opinion is. I never say buy this watch, or, if you're type of this person, you should buy this watch. But I had a quick look because this is something that's very interesting to me when I have comments that are geared towards your bias, you can't sell to me. I had a quick look on YouTube, Teddy Balbazar, 977,000 subscribers, Watchfinder, 1.13 million, Nico, 1.66 million. These are the biggest watch YouTubers in the game. And what do they all have in common? They are all part of companies that sell watches commercially to people. So this perception that, hey, all these little YouTubers are trying to sell me things, well, actually, the channels that the vast majority of watch content consumers are watching are direct channels for companies that sell watches.
I think you hit it nail on the head. I think it is a minority people who don't like to be sold to and will make it their opinion known. I think the vast majority of people choose Teddy, choose Watchfinder, not only because they have something to sell, but I mean, like, those videos are so well done, right? They're almost cinematic, right? And so they have the support system, right? And maybe it's through a bench, like a Watchfinder who has other forms of income with their sales. They can really knock it out of the park when they do videos. Teddy kind of started from small, independent, small channel, and then became what he is now. I mean, he probably had some help along the way, and that's totally fine. But I think you're right. I think there is a small minority there, and it's often really the small minority that makes the loudest noise, right? We see that in a lot of places outside of watch collecting, and I love your counter on that one, using the examples of Nico, Teddy, and Watchfinder.
Next point on this is two brands that I work the most with, which are probably Christopher Ward and Citizen. All of the watches I have reviewed for them, although Christopher Ward did send me a watch recently, but for many years, 5 years or so, they sent me a watch and I returned it. There was no money involved. I'd joked that they used to send me a notepad, although with full disclosure, they did send me a watch very kindly last year as a thank you for the last 5 years worth of work. But if you distributed that across all the content, same with Citizen, they have sent me one watch, but that all of the others have gone back. There's a perception that because you have a relationship with the brand, that you can't be objective. I find that most of the brands, when you are objective about it, they appreciate that. They want you to review the watch so that they can learn from. I'm not saying they're all like this, but a lot of the brands that are confident in the product that they have will like reviews because they'll accept criticism about it. Now, I could be better at this because honestly, I only accept watches in for review that I think I'm gonna like. So I already like the style, or I like the company. So I could do a better job, honestly, of accepting perhaps watches in that I don't think I'm gonna like. Whereas on the flip side of that, If you are just reviewing your own watches, I still think there is this idea of what's known as sunk cost fallacy, which is if you've spent money on a watch, you don't. I think it's hard for some people to, and you see this in a lot of forums, it's hard for some people to criticize watches that they've spent a lot of money on
Mhm.
themselves. I'm happy with talking about watches that I don't like, even if I have paid money for them. Bias, but you're missing the other half of the argument, which is the sunk cost fallacy, which is, hey, I spent money on this, so I'm less likely to criticize it because then I'm sort of criticizing the research that I've done on the watch or perhaps my choice.
I'm going to push back a little bit on this with you because of what I explained before, and this is my experience. No matter what kind of relationship you have with a brand, and whether they're fine with you being honest, your honest opinion on it, I still think it's human nature to please. And so while maybe you go in there, and I'm not just saying you, but maybe when your typical YouTube content creator goes in there with the good intent to be fair, subconsciously, I mean, that relationship creeps in. I think there is going to be always some bias there. Now, your counterpoint, I hear your counterpoint. I don't think your average Joe complainer on YouTube is gonna see that counterpoint, right? They're just like, okay, well, I got my own watches. I bought them because I like them. So I don't know what this guy's talking about, but I can see, because it's a lot easier to point other people's faults and actually take inventory of yourself, right? We know how people react to us on YouTube, right? They're behind a keyboard and that's all they care. The keyboard warriors, and they're ready for attack. They're not ready to actually look and deep down inside of themselves. I'm not totally buying what you're selling on that one.
One of my other points was what is bias? Because I think everything we do as humans has a bias towards it, doesn't it? Every opinion that we have, especially in reviews, it's very hard, if not impossible, I think, to be completely objective because one of my biases is I don't like watches without the date. So I already don't necessarily gravitate towards reviewing watches that don't have the date because it's not something that I like in my own watches. So I have that inherent bias, and it's not necessarily a bias towards any particular brand. It's just a bias to personal preferences. I also don't like DLC coated watches as another example. So that's another bias I have. From my point of view, I am biased because I am selecting watches that I think I might like to start with. I also, there is definitely a bias, certainly with Christopher Ward, I have a bias towards looking at their watches positively, although not all the reviews I've done for them are positive. There was one watch that I did not like. In fact, there's a couple that I did not like at all. One was the 12 that they sent me, which is a very popular watch. The colorway I didn't like. They made a bronze watch that I was not a fan of, and I made it clear. But I like the brand, I like where they're going, and I like their vision, so I can sort of look at their watch selection on a much longer term. So I think everyone is biased, I will say that. If you know what you're looking for and you're watching a review to get an alternative opinion on it, I don't think it's something you should be as concerned about just going with your eyes open.
I think where the danger zone here is for a lot of people when they come into the hobby and then they immerse themselves with content, they come from a position of inexperience, right? And so, when I came back into watch collecting in 2018, man, one of the first watches I bought, right, was a Seiko XKX. That's because everybody had it. Now, look, I mean, I don't think Seiko was necessarily working with anybody at the time, but soon after that, one of the next watches I got was a Squale. Now, we know a certain YouTuber who has a relationship with Squale, and that certain YouTuber was showcasing that brand a lot. And, Squale's a fine watch, but I would have never heard of it, right? I would have probably never bought it if it wasn't for this YouTuber. Again, and maybe when we wrap up our discussion, I'll touch into this a little bit, but there's also there's not only just a responsibility for the content creator, but there's also a responsibility to being a smart consumer.
My final point on this, to be a YouTuber or actually any content creator on Instagram, it's actually very hard to be, I think, a watch reviewer based on costs associated with it. So YouTube, if I had to buy every single watch that I reviewed, I would be doing one review a month or one review every 2 weeks. But YouTube algorithm, you have to feed it. Otherwise, you are nobody. 2 reviews a week plus a live stream. And I'm just keeping my head above water in terms of making sure that I'm getting consistent views on them. And that doesn't even happen. So it would be impossible for me. Also, fiscally irresponsible of me to buy 2
Yeah.
watches a week. I have a family. You have a family as well. That is that would be verging on a hoarding obsession to be buying 2 watches a week just to review them, just so that you can have this perception of not being biased. The other flip side to that as well is that a lot of the watches that I review and other YouTubers, you cannot buy them. For example, Rolexes that I borrow, but even a lot of these prototypes, to go back to that Ubik one, there's a number of Kickstarters, pre-production watches that I reviewed, like Christopher Ward. I'll give an example of this. Is Christopher Ward is a brand that people are excited about their releases. One of the few, I would say, where enthusiasts like ours, because they're obtainable, people get very excited about their releases. For example, the Christopher Ward 12. If I was to have bought that watch, I wouldn't have received it till 6 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks maybe, after it was released. But because they sent me a prototype that I returned, a prototype before they released it, I was able to drop that review on the first day. And most of the Christopher Ward reviewers know that there is a golden window. If you can drop one on the day of launch because they sent you a prototype, then that is when you get the most views. So the perception of it's impossible to feed the YouTube algorithm and buy these watches yourself, and also some of the watches you cannot buy. They're either prototypes or they're unobtainable.
My channel has morphed several times, right? I've gone from, doing reviews to live streaming to now I'm kind of going into a once in a while review, 2 live streams, and trying to come up with a topic video every week to discuss, because of the cost, the overhead of, you got shipping too, right? You got shipping you got to deal with, right? I have been fortunate that I've had some really great friends and subscribers to the channel who have sent me some of their watches in for review. And I always, in those reviews, have mentioned, so-and-so has sent it in, right? And so-and-so has told me I could say whatever I want. And I feel more comfortable, right? I feel more comfortable like being honest with them because of the relationships that we have. And they don't care because they are much better people than I am. And they can totally take criticism and just let it go, and that'd be totally fine, right? It's so hard, and I agree with you to do this and constantly get in, watches in for review. Spending that kind of money, you can get yourself in a quite big of a hole. So there's no perfect answer to any of all this, right? I think what it comes down to, and maybe this is like kind of like how I'll segue into some of like what I want to talk about, which is pretty much, I've already said a lot of what I've already said, is that, look, disclosure is very, very huge here, right? For some reason, I hold the watch YouTube community to a different standard than I would do if I wanted to see a review on a pair of socks from Amazon, right? I hold it differently, and maybe because it's closer and dear to me, right? There's a responsibility that we have when we are showcasing pieces, when we're having discussions, that we have to think about how other people are going to perceive not only what we say, but what we do, right? They're going to watch what we do as well. Not necessarily what, they shouldn't necessarily watch what we say all the time, because maybe that could be BS, right? For some people. But what we do. And, but also, look, the consumer has a responsibility here too, right? Man, people take this stuff so seriously, right? And I think that's where the mistake is made. When I'm interested in a watch, let's keep it to watches. I watch several reviews, multiple content creators. I'm going to naturally gravitate to the ones that are going to affirm what I feel about the watch, but I also want to hear some contrarian views upon it. So I would suggest, right, to your average YouTube content consumer who may have a problem with some of the things that we do, is to just expand your horizon and just watch several, just more content. But that does not leave us off the hook, right? We have to be responsible. And for me, I've chosen not to work with brands in particular because I feel like no matter what the parameters of our agreement are, I still feel like there's a part of me that's going to pull back a little bit if I feel a certain way, because I like to please people.
I think my reviews end up being positive because for the most part, I'm reviewing watches that fit into my...
And you're a positive person. Do you know what I mean? That's part of it too.
People don't always like to watch a lot of negative stuff, although YouTube tends to reward the more negative, certainly mine, more negative slanted ones. But then what type of person do you become? And I guess one final, I guess, funny point on this is that the other thing with reviewing your own collection is you won't realize this, I think, until you're a YouTube content creator. But if you review a watch from your own collection that you really love, it's the kiss of death in terms of views. Because more often than not, the more passionate you... I give a prime example of the Timex Data Link watch that from the 90s that I think is probably one of the most interesting Timex watches that has ever been made. It was one of the few Timex watches to ever be NASA authorized. Really interesting backstory. I guess I've made 3 videos on this watch. Nobody's interested except me.
Yeah, absolutely. But you also do this because you have a passion and love for it, Sam, right? That's where the balance is as a content creator is. I want to do the stuff that I like, but do I want to do the stuff people are gonna watch? And do I make some concessions to work with brands and people to showcase watches that I think people want to see? As long as there's full disclosure, I keep on hammering this point. As long as there's full disclosure, I don't see anything wrong with it. It's just the content creators who do not disclose, that's what's giving the rest of us the bad name, few bad apples.
There's definitely a balance, continued improvement. As I say at the end of every single review, let me know in the comment section down below what you think of this. Head on over to Bobby's channel and subscribe. The link is in the description down below. Bobby, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. Great discussion this morning.
Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on Casual Watch Reviews. Thanks, guys. Bye.